Well, thank you, Pastor Allen, for taking some time to talk to us here at Turning Point Academy about how we can restore, reclaim, and revive education in America.
Amen. Well, I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Of our viewers that don't know you, can you introduce yourself and share what church you're at?
Absolutely. I'm Pastor Alan Jackson with World Outreach Church in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, which is really just a suburb of Nashville.
Awesome. So, something we really care about is making sure that Christ is at the center of education. So, I want to hear your opinion on what is the church's role in education?
It's such an important question. I think it's one the church has stepped away from. I think big picture, the church has a responsibility to be the conscience of our culture. And so an essential part of that is how our children are educated. So I think, first of all, we have to help families understand that. So we've got to be willing to engage with cultural issues in our churches. Most of us that have formal theological training were trained in the social issues of the first century or maybe the 10th century BC, so we could talk about biblical formation. But the point of that education was to help us engage the 21st century. So I think if we'll use our pulpits and our churches to help families understand a biblical worldview on our current cultural issues, then they're prepared to shape the educational systems, whether they're public or private, that they're sending their children to.
Yeah, well, we've seen a lot of changes in the public schools, just the amount of perverse ideologies that are being taught within them. So, from your perspective, should Christians send their kids to public school?
Well, I'm a product of public education. Now, I'm 100 years old. I went to school when the Ark landed. But I don't think we can afford to abandon the public schools because that's still where the majority of our children go. And if we're going to reform culture, which I believe is the church's assignment to be salt and light, it's essential that we educate our children with a biblical worldview. So we have to take our faith back into the public school systems. When they asked us to leave, we rather politely said, okay. Or when they told us to pray outside the building around a flagpole, we have become so cowed, so timid, so cowardly that we said thank you. I believe we have to take our biblical worldview back into education, back into the corporate boardroom, back into government. The separation of church and state, or the freedom of religion, is not freedom from religion. So yeah, we need our faith in the schools.
Absolutely. What advice do you have for parents and teachers that want to stand firm in their faith but are working in public school systems or are hearing the other voices of, like, you shouldn't be as involved as a parent in your child's education?
Well, I think to first of all recognize there's a lot of division in our culture. And so if you're going to stand up for a biblical worldview, you're going to have people that oppose that. You should expect it. If you go play a football game, you understand there's offense and defense, you're going to have opposition. And there's going to be opposition, so we shouldn't be surprised by it. And if we know that, then we ask God for his wisdom on where to take our stands, when to take our stands, how to stand up, so that we do it reflecting the wisdom of God and not just our own belligerence or stubbornness. Certainly it's not about hate or violence, but we're standing up for the protection of our children. And if we'll do that, God will help us.
Yeah, absolutely. So something we like to focus on is that we want to focus on the Socratic method in our classical education schools that we're starting, but also we want education to be focused on truth, beauty, and goodness. Where do you think those things come from?
Well, I think all of those things emerge from God. I don't think you have truth or beauty or goodness apart from God. And it's been the collapse of the church that's caused the schools to collapse. So I think if we can see our churches become vital and alive again, we see our schools become alive and vital again. There's no truth apart from God. There's no beauty apart from God. And so, we've got to stop apologizing because we believe in the authority of Scripture or a God who's a creator of all. If we will do that, I believe God will meet us and help us.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're beginning to see that with people that are, taking cases to court and standing up for their faith and their beliefs and truly reforming education. So we have our Educator Summit coming up this July 10 through 13. It's an event where we encourage education activists, but also teachers, school board members, and homeschool families to stand firm in their beliefs and get the tools that they need to provide quality education. This year's theme is going to be Make Education Great Again, returning to our purpose. So I'd love to hear from your perspective, what is the purpose of education and how can we return back to that?
Wow, that's such a good question. Well, I think education is intended to give to children the tools they'll need to flourish in the world we find ourselves in. And there's some basic life skills you need to interact to make you literate. And then it's also about socialization and the wisdom you need to take your values, know how to articulate them, and how to express them in the world. Tragically, for a few decades now, education has been doing the opposite. They've been undermining a biblical worldview and undercutting biblical values. I've been in multiple classroom settings where the professor or the teacher would say, you've learned the Bible wrong from your local pastor or your parents, and I'm going to teach you the right way to understand. We're going to deconstruct your faith.
Horrible.
If you find a faculty member like that, first remove your children and then do your best to see them removed. At whatever level the education's taking place, that's inappropriate. It's not their assignment.
Absolutely. So in your opinion, how else can we practically include the biblical worldview into education?
Well, first we put the biblical worldview into our children before we send them to school. And then we help them reinforce it when they come home. And I think if we do that, if we send them into those places and we pay attention to what they're being taught, and we show them how to continue to articulate that worldview, it shouldn't be frightening to hear alternate views of our world. That's not a threat. I'm happy for there to be a plurality in our education. But I don't want them to argue against or to minimize the values of our biblical worldview. And then the schools and the churches can help, but it begins with the parents and the families.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for the work you are doing to preach the gospel and to encourage your congregation to stay true to what they believe in Jesus Christ.
Well, we are delighted to stand with Turning Point, and particularly what you're doing at Turning Point Academy. So keep up the good work.
Awesome. Thank you.